So something pretty interesting happened recently with Paco, one of the list editors of the DemonList, saying that they were looking for methods to implement an unrated tab to the DemonList. I'm going to quickly explain why we would want that before getting into talking about the post, but if you already kind of know the details of CBF and how it causes levels to stay unrated, you can skip to here. Anyway, as I said, Paco says the main reason they would want to add an unrated tab is so that CBF verified levels can get placed. As of right now, the DemonList only places rated levels on the list, which are levels officially recognized by RobTop. Though, since RobTop downgraded the physics in the 2.2 update to register at 2/3 of the rate it was before, CBF was introduced around February to make the game more precise. CBF stands for click between frames, and as the name suggests, it lets players click between the 240 frames that the game calculates physics on, allowing players' inputs to register as soon as their input device sends a signal, which is usually around 1000 to 8000 Hz. This is obviously a huge jump in quality compared to clicking at 240 frames per second, and understandably makes the game way more precise and allows for smoother gameplay. On top of this, clicking between frames means players can pretty much run the game at any frame rate and still have the same result, where before, if you ran the game at a higher frame rate, you would be able to also play with better physics. So this is a much better alternative that allows players with all kinds of different devices to be able to equally compete. Unfortunately, although RobTop has given signs that he wants to add CBF, no such update has been added, and he's had plenty of chances to do so since he originally announced it. On top of that, RobTop refuses to rate levels verified with CBF, causing levels like Ashley Wave Trials and the Catacombs to have no chance of getting rated or placed, just because he refused to add an update that would literally help everybody. All that is suffice to say that the list would consider adding unrated levels mainly for the purpose of allowing CBF verified levels to be added and be more fair to all kinds of players. On top of this, it would also break away from the list's dependency on RobTop for what levels get added, and would depend more on the community's decisions and views of levels. In general, if you want to hear my opinion on CBF, I think it's pretty much a fact that it's cheating and gives you an unfair advantage over those who choose not to use it. However, we should be open-minded and let people play a freaking video game however they want to play it. And it's not fair to everyone to restrict that. We need to accept that some people could never compete without CBF, and that some people could never feel okay using it. So on both sides, a solution would be a compromise like what Paco suggested, so let's talk about it. So I'm going to start by going over Paco's post in summary, and then look at some of the comments and replies and kind of give my analysis on the whole situation. The post starts with Paco mentioning how they think CBF, and by extension allowing CBF to be used for list completions, is a net positive, but mentions how it's not sustainable to the list to allow players to use CBF, while to get a level on the list, you can't use CBF, which means there will always be a bigger difference in opinion between CBF users and vanilla users. Paco suggests that as a solution, we should use a voting-based system to make an unrated tab for the list. The system would most likely be voting-based to prevent levels that are special and therefore shouldn't be included. I do think it's a good idea to add another tab to the main Pointer Crate list, most likely similar to something like tabs seen on speedrun.com. I honestly think we are way overdue for the DemonList to fully implement ideas like the all-rated Extreme DemonList and the PMonList to the website so different playing styles are equally represented. Paco moves on to stress that this system is mostly for CBF verifications or other levels that went unrated for reasons seemingly separate to their quality, for example, being too similar to another level or using a Not on Newgrounds song. Paco goes on to explain the logistics of the vote system, specifically focusing on who would be voting. She notes that an entirely community-based vote could be easily influenced by public figures, or swayed by preconceptions of a level's gameplay, kind of like how players blew up over Avernus's fixed hitbox gameplay, even though the actual victors of the level didn't seem to mind too much. Paco also figures it's not realistic to have only people with or without list points vote, because in both cases there could be external factors causing biased voting and unfair judgment about levels. It seems to her that the only unbiased group of people to vote would probably be in-game moderators. The system itself would likely be ran on a Discord server where moderators are given a level, vote on the level, and if it meets a certain threshold, it'll get added to the list. One thing I noticed here is that the threshold is not necessarily a 50-50 vote, which might suggest we would need more or less of a consensus on levels to see them added to the list. These were kind of footnotes of the system, but a couple extra points were laid out in the second part of Paco's post. The first note is about participation. If not enough mods are able to participate, they can nominate other people to add more votes. As a person who's tried to run a voting system in GD before, participation is definitely a problem after a while, so I would think this is a nice system to have. Although nominating random people kinda seems like a weird idea to me, It would probably just be a more stable system if there were already people designated to stand in if need be, but I also understand that the current system is kind of designed to make it so that if you nominate somebody, they're going to be available. The second note again stresses that this is still specifically to include rate-worthy CBF verifications on the list, and not necessarily lower rate standards. I honestly think the outcome of this will still likely result in levels like the Wonder View getting rated anyway, because God knows why those levels aren't rated yet. But the funny thing is that no CBF verified levels right now would really have a good chance of getting added, in my opinion. Levels like Aquamarine and Ashley Wave Trials probably deserve a non-feature rate at the absolute most, so it's pretty obvious why those verifiers chose to use CBF in the first place, because I don't think they expected them to get rated anyway. So with that said, I do think it's important to anybody watching this and paying attention to these levels that this change will likely only affect future levels being verified, so verifiers aren't forced to play on vanilla in the first place. One example of this is Apocalyptic Trilogy, which right now has a nerfed version being verified by Poltercast on CBF, and it's going to place around top 50 on the list, but he said he's basically just going to wait for whoever is the first vanilla victor to get it rated. So it's just stuff like this that'll make it easier for people to verify levels without having to force themselves to play a worse version of the game. The third note accounts for harassment, which has definitely been a problem with the rate system in the past, saying that voters should be able to remain anonymous. However, the vote margins will be posted, meaning that we would be able to see how much a level actually won or lost by. The fourth note accounts for levels that lose the mod vote by a small margin. If something like that happened, the level would be left up to some kind of community vote, and in the post it's not really clear who would vote and where it would be held, but the idea would be to get a group of people who would honestly judge a level well if it deserves to be on the list. I honestly think that if any level fails the mod vote, there should be some discussion or possible remediation, but I'd say if a level fails the vote by something like 2/3 or 4/5 of the vote, it's probably not worth it to run it by the community again. The last note Paco added says that the list would likely wait a bit after extended list levels get verified with CBF to see if there's a victor on vanilla that will make it eligible for a rate. I think this is a decently reasonable thing to do, especially considering the placement opinions on vanilla will probably be more regarded than people playing with CBF. Though even with that said, I don't really think it'd be a big deal for the demon list to just immediately consider placing a level, because they would likely still implement the 1 month after acceptance rule, and there's a decent chance the level would already be beaten on vanilla, rated, and have some opinions by the time it places anyway. Alright, so with all that out of the way, I'm going to go into the discussion, looking at some of the responses Paco got, and seeing how those views were interpreted into the system. Some people asked how the stats viewer would tally up points from two different lists, and she responded that they would likely run a separate stats viewer for each list. Some people asked about the ambiguous vote threshold that I mentioned earlier, and Paco responded that they'll probably do mock votes on some levels to see where the general level of agreement on placement is. Now, this part did scare me a little bit because I feel like it really depends on what levels they choose. Like, think about if you were given a level like Limbo, obviously that would be a 100% pretty much agreement rate. And I feel like if they just chose really agreed upon levels to be rated, we would kind of end up with a threshold that's way higher than it realistically should be. So I really hope it doesn't end up being like above 70 or something like that, because I feel like that'd be a really hard barrier to beat for a lot of levels. But I guess we'll just have to see what happens. One interesting FAQ was about if RobTop adds CBF. Paco said that the listing will likely wait until 2.21 gets released, and if RobTop doesn't release it then they'll just assume he doesn't plan to release it. But if he does, they would probably repurpose the Rated Plus tab to include different kinds of levels while merging the old Rated Plus tab with the list, assuming that those levels finally get rated. For me, I just hope that they're not willing to wait too long for 2.21 to come out, because something tells me it's not going to come out this year. And if it doesn't come out this year, I think they should just implement this new system anyway. Another FAQ addresses levels that don't pass the vote. Paco suggested that if the interest is there, the more a level loses by, the longer it has until it could get voted on again. I think this could be a decent solution to the problem that I posed earlier. But again, I think if a level loses by a decent amount, then we might want to do something else, like the more the level loses by, the bigger the winning margin has to be in a community vote. Because in general, I don't know that moderators will magically change their mind after waiting 3 months to vote again. The last thing Paco mentioned was just to clarify that the unrated or rated plus tab would be rated and unrated levels mixed together, not just unrated levels by themselves. One concern I've seen in a lot of places that was addressed here is that the demon list will essentially become and replace the global list. If you don't know, the global list is a Russian demon list that already includes unrated levels along with a couple extra lists. First of all, Paco responded that the way the global demon list adds levels is not really the best method in her opinion, which might mean that we get a more transparent approach from the demon list. Also, the global list includes not only unrated levels, but also all extreme demons totaling at over 1,200 levels. So I don't think the demon list would really suck too much worth out of it, assuming it even had any in the first place. Another comment I saw was that this change would kind of force a lot of effort on the mod team who aren't exactly inclined or incentivized to participate in the list. I could see this being a problem, but it's probably likely that the mods who are more active and interested in the game would have no problem with a system like this, and as mentioned earlier, they could nominate others to participate if numbers ever became a problem. The other thing Prometheus says here is that levels not getting rated that are well received but not necessarily rate worthy. I could definitely see this happen with a lot of levels on the unrated demon list, like Dex Dark and even Based After Based, where the way a lot of people see the levels is very polarizing. I honestly think the quality of levels dropping a bit really isn't a big deal at all, as long as the gameplay quality is prioritized in lesser quality levels. And since this would be a community-ran change, there's really no reason we shouldn't finally begin to consider gameplay as a factor of a good level. Multiple people have shown interest in levels like Based After Based and Dex Dark, so it's fair to say that if people want to play them, they should be on the list. I also saw a couple of complaints about oversaturation of levels on the list. Again, like I said earlier, Paco really stressed that this change would mainly affect CBF verifications. There are only a few of that kind right now that would even be considered close to rate worthy, so what's more likely to happen is that a small amount of levels would get accepted, such as Centipede and the Wonder View, which are generally accepted levels that reach the rate standards, and then going forward, the already rate-worthy levels can just be verified with CBF. In practice, it doesn't look like the system seeks to lower rate standards, but more so to recognize levels that fly under the radar and make the disposition between verifier and victor less forced. Another very valid concern I saw was from Influx about whether a two-list system is really necessary. I personally don't really think that separate stats viewers would really make sense, and it would make more sense for unrated levels to just be extra points for people to achieve on the main stats viewer. We have to remember that lists exist to rank the hardest demons. It doesn't really matter if we have two lists that display different info, but I think to reach more of a parity with interest and competition, we would definitely need to merge the stats viewers in some way because, like he says in this post, one of them would be prioritized over the other and nobody would really care about the second one. Aside from that, the majority of the comments I saw praised the idea and talked about wanting more unrated demons on the list. While I do think it's kind of a cool niche thing in this community to appreciate unrated levels, we do have to admit when some of them are unrateable, even if they run with a really cool concept or song or are just funny. I really do hope that the few levels that were done dirty do get some justice here, but I also think this decision will really only change the whole verifier problem, and I wouldn't expect any more than 15-ish current unrated levels to ever get placed on the list. If you want a quick glance at the levels that might get added, I put together a quick list of the levels that are around top 150 difficulty that have a decent chance of getting added. Though as you can see, the green ones are supposed to be a lot more likely than the red. Honestly, it's a lot more levels than I initially predicted could end up placing on the list. Even the green ones are levels that I can't realistically see getting rejected unless the threshold for adding levels is way more than half. Even so, these are levels that have built up over 7 years of this game's history, with small levels going under Rob's radar. So one thing to keep in mind is that even if every green level on this list is added, there would never be a wave of levels like this again. Anyway, with all that said, I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'm open to a conversation in the comments, so if anyone's confused or concerned about this, I'll be there to respond, and I'm sure the list team will appreciate having more discourse about things like this over on YouTube. Anyway, as always, I don't really have much else to say besides subscribe, because I put probably too much time and effort into these videos, and you'll be able to directly influence what I put out in the future, and maybe even be in some videos. So I'm really excited for stuff like that to come. But either way, have a great rest of your day, unless of course you don't subscribe, in which case, I wish a minor inconvenience upon you. Anyway, see you guys.
The Reaper.